Frozen Betrayal, the wood chipper murder of Helle Crafts. Welcome to Ontario Cold Cases, where we dig deep into the chilling and twisted stories that haunt our past. In this episode, we bring you a tale so dark, so shocking, that it forever changed the landscape of American justice. It begins with a love story, but like all the best ones, it hides its secrets in the shadows. Helle Crafts was a woman with dreams as vast as the skies she once flew across. But it was on the cold ground of Connecticut that she would meet a man whose past was as mysterious as his future would prove to be deadly. Richard Crafts, a former Marine aviator, a man with a web of secrets. A man who once, a hero in the skies, would become a monster in the eyes of the world. Their marriage, once a whirlwind romance, turned dark. And on one fateful night, that darkness would consume everything. On November 18th, 1986, after returning from a flight, Helle was dropped off at her home. A few days later, she vanished. No calls, no goodbyes. And Richard? His story? It changed with each passing hour. What followed would spark a relentless investigation, where every clue unraveled the terrifying truth. A truth so horrifying, it would later inspire a Hollywood film. But what makes this case even more chilling is that for months, the police had no body, just fragments of a story that would soon be pieced together in a way no one could have imagined. Tonight on Ontario Cold Cases, we follow the trail of a missing woman, a frozen betrayal, and the weapon that tore life apart, a wood chipper. This is the story of Helle Crafts, and how her death would send ripples through the legal system, ultimately leading to the first murder conviction in Connecticut, without a body. Join us as we unravel the mystery of Frozen Betrayal, the wood chipper murder of Helle Crafts. Stay tuned. This is just the beginning. Hello, I'm Jay Nickel, Nickel Investigations. And this is Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast. Ontario Cold Cases is a gripping true crime podcast that shines a light on unsolved murders, disappearances, and forgotten crimes from across the province and the world. With meticulous research, compelling storytelling, and a commitment to historical accuracy, we bring you the real stories of victims, investigators, and suspects, stories that demand to be heard. Each week, we take you deep into the world of true crime with a packed schedule of episodes. Tuesdays, historical true crime cases, exploring infamous and obscure crimes from history. Wednesdays, the Mick and Mac Mysteries, a thrilling fictional detective series set in 1950s Toronto. Thursdays, World Cold Case Thursday, investigating unsolved cases from around the globe. Sundays, Ontario Cold Cases, the latest episode uncovering an unsolved mystery from Ontario. From high-profile crimes that shock the nation to little-known cases waiting for justice, we uncover the truth, one case at a time. Join us as we explore the dark corners of history and mystery, where every clue could lead to answers and every case deserves a second look. Subscribe now wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts and never miss an episode of Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast. Before I go on, with spring approaching, I'd like to mention a great product and website for those thinking of the golf course. 420 Golf Apparel, where we are bringing class to the short grass. What's in your closet? And teeing it up with Teddy Mack and the Digital Guru on 4rightpodcast.com. Early life. A Love Story with Shadows. Helle Crafts entered the world on July 4th, 1947, in the picturesque town of Charlottenlund, Denmark. A striking and ambitious woman, she set her sights in the skies, training as a flight attendant for Pan American Airways in Florida. It was there in 1969 that she met the man who would change the course of her life, Richard Crafts. Richard was no ordinary pilot. A former Marine aviator, he had spent 5 years flying clandestine missions over Laos with Air America, a front for the CIA's covert operations. By the time he crossed paths with Helle, he traded in his shadowy past for the commercial skies, working as a pilot for Eastern Airlines. He also dabbled in law enforcement, serving as a part-time police officer, a detail that would later add an eerie layer to his story. The two married in the mid-1970s and settled in the quiet suburban town of Newtown, Connecticut, where they built what seemed to be an idyllic life. Their home soon echoed with the laughter of 3 children, Andrew, Thomas, and Christina. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. In 1984, Richard's life took a dramatic turn when he was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. Doctors gave him slim odds of survival. Yet against all expectations, he clawed his way back from the brink. The illness, however, did little to soften his demeanor. Those close to Helle knew that her marriage was far from happy. Friends whispered about Richard's cold and secretive nature. Worse, Helle confided in them that he sometimes hit her. The once romantic whirlwind that had swept her into his life had long since settled into a dark and stormy reality, one that would ultimately take a deadly turn. Lead up to disappearance, a desperate warning. By the fall of 1986, Helle Crafts had had enough. The once intriguing man she had married, the pilot with a secretive past, had become a cold and unfaithful husband. Suspicion gnawed her when she discovered an unfamiliar long-distance phone number on their phone records. Her worst fears took shape. Richard was lying to her. Determined to uncover the truth, she hired private investigator Keith Mayo, a no-nonsense detective who wasted no time getting results. His surveillance work led to an undeniable photographic proof. Richard was having an affair. The betrayal was the final straw. In October 1986, Helle officially filed for divorce. But she knew Richard well enough to understand that he wouldn't let her go easily. Sitting across from her lawyer, her voice was calm but resolute as she issued an ominous warning. "If anything ever happens to me, don't think it was an accident." Her instincts were right. Richard didn't just resist the divorce. He wove a manipulative lie, claiming his cancer returned in a desperate bid to make her stay. But Helle wasn't fooled. She called his doctor and learned the truth. Richard was in perfect health. It was a chilling realization. If he was willing to fabricate an illness to control her, what else was he capable of? Disappearance. A vanishing act. On the evening of November 18th, 1986, sometime between 6:30 and 7 o'clock p.m., Helle Crafts stepped out of a car and into the cold night air. A friend had just dropped her off at her home in Newtown, Connecticut, after she returned from a long-haul flight from Frankfurt to New York City. She was exhausted but glad to be back. It would be the last time anyone saw her alive. Days passed. When Helle failed to show up for her next scheduled flight assignment, her co-workers grew concerned. It wasn't like her to miss work without a word. Pan American called Richard Crafts to ask about her whereabouts. His answer was simple. Too simple. Helle, he claimed, had flown to Denmark to care for her sick mother. But that wasn't the last version of the story. When questioned again, Richard changed his tune. This time he said she had gone on vacation with a friend. The shifting explanations raised eyebrows, but for the moment, there was no concrete reason to doubt him. No one knew it yet, but Helle Crafts had disappeared without a trace. And the chilling truth was far worse than anyone could imagine. Up next, investigation and discovery. A murder unraveled. For more true crime, be sure to check out my friend on Total Crime, available on Substack. Investigation and discovery. A murder unraveled. Not long after Helle Crafts vanished without a trace, the man she had turned to for help before her disappearance, private investigator Keith Mayo, was contacted again. Helle's friends and colleagues didn't buy Richard's ever-changing explanations, and Mayo was convinced she hadn't simply left town. But when he approached the police, they dismissed her disappearance as a routine domestic dispute. Mayo wasn't one to back down. If law enforcement would investigate, he would. His first stop was the Crafts' nanny, Dawn Marie Thomas. What she told him sent a chill down his spine. Shortly after Helle went missing, Donna noticed a dark stain on the bedroom carpet. Before she could think too much about it, the carpet was ripped up, no explanation given. Then there was the garage. A large, relatively new freezer had been there before Helle disappeared. Now it was gone. And Richard? He'd acted strangely on November 19th, the day after Helle was last seen. That morning he'd taken Dawn and the children to his sister's house, citing a power outage. Helle, he claimed, was already there. But when they arrived, she was nowhere to be found. Richard, however, didn't seem the least bit worried. By the time police finally got involved, Richard's behavior was looking more suspicious by the day. A deep dive in his credit card records turned up two alarming purchases: a rented wood chipper and a U-Haul truck, both acquired just before Helle's disappearance. Then came a breakthrough. A snowplow driver stepped forward with an eerie story. On a freezing November night, around 3:30 a.m., he'd spotted a wood chipper positioned on a bridge over the Houstonic River. A man in an orange poncho stood nearby. An hour later, the driver saw the same wood chipper again, this time on River Road. Armed with this tip, investigators scoured the riverbank, hoping to find answers. What they uncovered was the stuff of nightmares. Wood chips scattered along the shore, an envelope with Helle's name on it, strands of blonde hair, tiny bone fragments, blue fibers, a piece of metal, and a single painted red fingernail. If that wasn't chilling enough, divers searching the murky depths of the river made an even more shocking discovery: a chainsaw with its serial number scratched off. It was caked with hairs and fibers. But Richard had made one fatal mistake. Forensic experts managed to recover the serial number 5921616 and traced it directly to Richard's own warranty card. The case against Richard Crafts was mounting. When police searched the Crafts' home, forensic specialists connected even more evidence to Helle. The red nail polish on the found fingernail perfectly matched a bottle in her vanity. The blonde hairs from the riverbank were identical to those in her hairbrush. Dental x-rays revealed the metal fragment was actually a crown from one of Helle's teeth. The case soon became a media sensation, spreading across the United States and beyond. With pressure mounting, the state attorney turned the case over to the state police on December 26, 1986, hoping fresh eyes would crack it wide open. Enter Dr. Henry Lee, a forensic expert whose name was synonymous with solving the impossible. His team meticulously examined the evidence and uncovered 5 tiny blood stains on the mattress, which matched Helle's blood type. Their analysis indicated she had likely been struck with a blunt force object, based on the trajectory of the blood spatters. Blood was also found on the bathroom towels, further supporting the theory that something horrific had happened inside the home. Then came the final horrifying test, to prove that a wood chipper could, in fact, be used to destroy human remains. Dr. Lee conducted his own experiment. Using a dead pig, which has a similar body composition to humans, he fed it through an identical wood chipper. The results were undeniable. The bone fragments found in the riverbank bore the same distinctive grooves as those produced in the test. As if that weren't damning enough, additional tests confirmed the tissue-like material found in the U-Haul truck Richard had rented tested positive for human remains. The missing freezer? Never found. On January 5th, 1987, Richard was finally brought in for questioning and subjected to a polygraph test. He passed, but science had already spoken. 1 week later, on January 13th, 1987, Helle Crafts was legally declared dead. The case of the wood chip murder had just begun. Up next, arrest and sentencing. The first no-body murder conviction. Arrest and sentencing. The first no-body murder conviction. On January 13th, 1987, Richard Crafts was finally arrested. The case against him was staggering, and prosecutors weren't about to let him slip through their fingers. He was held on $750,000 bail, a price that barely scratched the surface of the horror he had allegedly committed. The media frenzy surrounding the case made it impossible to hold the trial in Newtown, so prosecutors moved it to New London, Connecticut. Their argument was chillingly simple. Richard Crafts murdered his wife because he refused to let her leave him. But proving it, that was a different challenge altogether. A web of evidence unfolds. Piece by piece, the prosecution unraveled Richard's twisted plan, laying out their theory of what had really happened that fateful November night. November 13th, 1986. Richard orders a brand new freezer, paying cash, and refusing to give his name or address. The dealer testifies in court Richard's secrecy was anything but normal. November 14th, 1986. Dawn, the family's nanny, hears Helle and Richard arguing. Afterward, Helle is visibly upset. November 18th, 1986. The night of the murder. Helle tucks the children into bed around 8 o'clock p.m. She changes into her nightshirt, the same blue fibers later found on the riverbank. She steps outside to check the mail. Richard is waiting. He strikes her twice in the head with his police flashlight, knocking her unconscious, or worse. He wraps her lifeless body in the bedsheets and shoves her into the garage freezer. He returns to the bedroom, scrubbing the bloodstains from the carpet with the bathroom towels. The next day, Richard drops off the children and nanny at his sister's house, claiming there was a power outage. Helle, he says, is already there. she isn't. With the house empty, Richard goes to work. He removes Helle's frozen body from the garage freezer and loads it into a U-Haul truck. He drives to the Houstonic River, stopping near the bridge. He dismembers her with a chainsaw. Piece by piece, he feeds her remains into a rented wood chipper, scattering them into the icy river below. Because the body was frozen solid, there was no blood splatter, an eerie attempt to cover his tracks. When the deed is done, he disassembles the chainsaw and tosses it into the Houstonic River, hoping it will never be found. The trial, and a shocking twist. With their case meticulously laid out, the prosecution rested, confident in their airtight evidence. Then Richard took the stand in his own defense. His claim? He had nothing to do with Helle's disappearance. He stuck to his story, denying everything. But not everyone was convinced. Not in the way the prosecution expected. After days of jury deliberation, the trial ended in a mistrial. One lone juror out of 12 refused to convict. The case wasn't over yet. The second trial was scheduled for November 1989. This time, the jury saw through Richard's lies. After just 8 hours of deliberation, the verdict came down. Guilty. Richard Crafts was sentenced to 50 years in prison. History is made. This case changed American legal history. It was the first murder conviction in Connecticut without a body. The first trial in Connecticut to allow cameras in the courtroom. The case that would forever be known as the wood chipper murder. Richard Crafts was set to be eligible for parole in 2022, but nothing could erase the horrific truth of what he had done. Up next, Aftermath, the legacy of the wood chipper murder. Aftermath, the legacy of the wood chipper murder. With her father behind bars and their mother brutally murdered, Helle and Richard Crafts' 3 children were left without parents. In the wake of the tragedy, friends rallied around them, with 2 launching a fundraising campaign to support the children's future. Ultimately, it was Richard's own sister, Karen Rogers, who took them in, providing them with a stable home. But even as she cared for his children, Karen had no illusions about her brother's innocence. She openly admitted that she believed Richard had murdered Helle, a chilling statement from someone who knew him better than most. Richard Crafts fights for his freedom. Unwilling to accept this fate, Richard filed an appeal in 1993 claiming that the evidence against him was purely circumstantial and should never have been enough for a conviction. The overwhelming media coverage had made it impossible for him to receive a fair trial. The state Supreme Court didn't buy it. They upheld his conviction, ensuring he would remain behind bars. But Richard wasn't finished making demands. That same year, he had the audacity to request access to Helle's estate, attempting to claim the assets of the very woman he had so brutally disposed of. The court swiftly denied his request. A crime that inspired Hollywood. The grotesque nature of the case left a permanent mark on pop culture. In 1996, the Coen brothers' film Fargo hit the big screen, featuring a now infamous scene involving a wood chipper and a murder cover-up. While not directly based on the Crafts case, the gruesome details were undeniably influenced by what had happened in Connecticut a decade earlier. A tragic end for the man who never gave up. One of the true heroes of the case, Private Investigator Keith Mayo, who fought tirelessly to bring justice for Helle, met a tragic fate in 1999. He died in a car accident, leaving behind a legacy of determination and truth-seeking that had helped solve one of the most infamous cases in modern history. Even decades later, the wood chipper murder remains one of the most haunting true crime stories ever told. A case that proved justice can be served even without a body. Helle Crafts saw her fate coming. She knew the man she married was dangerous. She told her lawyer, "If anything happens to me, don't think it was an accident." Yet despite her warnings, despite the growing evidence of her husband's violent nature, she still vanished into the night, leaving behind only scattered fragments of a life that once was. But her story didn't end there. Thanks to relentless investigators, forensic breakthroughs, and tireless work of those who refused to let her case go cold, justice was served. Richard Crafts, the man who thought he had committed the perfect crime, is now forever known as the killer in one of the most infamous murder cases in modern history, the wood chipper murder. If you found this episode gripping, don't forget to subscribe to Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast. You'll never miss an episode as we uncover the most haunting and perplexing cases from our country and beyond. Whether you listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you get your podcasts, make sure to hit that follow button. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave us a review. It helps more listeners find the show. And if you have a case you'd like us to cover, let us know on social media or at our official website. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, the truth is always out there, waiting to be found. Good night.